Welcome to Thalir. This is a place called Bud. This is budding forth for a new life, and we are Capuchins working for the renewal of the society and the church.
This is part of the Solanas KC Holistic Welfare Center, Viluppuram in India. We give motivational trainings and empowerment for religious and lay leaders, formators and formees, teachers and students, families, parents and children. We also give counseling to the individuals and the communities and the families. We conduct retreats and monthly recollections. Above all, we give special focus on the poorest of the poor, the marginalized, the migrants, and the welfare of the rural women and children. Solanas KC Holistic Welfare Center. Contact the Director, Nitya, YFM Cap. Email totalexcellencenow@gmail.com. Dear brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ, I am very happy to welcome one and all, east to west, north and south, all over the world, the English-speaking world of the religious, the formies and the formators joined together. We are around 800 to 1,000 people gathered here in this Zoom meeting now. We are going to listen to the special message by Fr.Jerry on the prophetic obedience to God's will, freedom to love and live for the gospel, and walking with the poorest and the least as on vow to be poor. And also we'll be listening to Father Wilson on the grace of community life. Father Jerry will be dealing on the 3 vows, and Father Wilson will be dealing with the community life. Welcome Father Jerry and Father Wilson.
Thank you so much, Father Nitya, for giving a very kind welcome. I like to begin the session with a very profound appreciation and very heartfelt congratulations to all the young ones and who are listening to me at this particular juncture. As I'm now talking to aspirants, postulants, pre-novices, minor seminarians, novices, juniors, and the post-novices, and it's all younger generations of their respective congregations. I really applaud, appreciate, and congratulate and salute each and every one of them for coming forward to accept the vocation to the consecrated life in this modernized world. When I joined my novitiate long back, and decades back, at that time options were rather limited. And today we are living in a globalized world, modernized world, digitalized world, and privatized world, a liberalized world. And this particular world scenario of today, of the 21st century, there are very many options, very many channels, very many alternatives, very many ways and means of life. In that particular context, younger generation were listening to me. The number it now says 414, 414, and I know good number of them, if not most of them, are the younger ones. I salute, thank God for the gift of and the call of vocation that they have received, and they are set free. They accept the challenge to be a consecrated member today. Appreciation. After saying that one, I let me know, give you a couple of points before I get into the topic proper. And the topic proper is prophetic obedience to God's will. I got 7 highlights to share. But before I take up the highlights, in terms of the focal theme of today, prophetic obedience to God's will, as I said earlier, couple of introductory prelude, some sort of opening words. After appreciating them, I like to now say, namely that good number of them, if not most of them, are formies, and they are at the various stages, from aspirancy, postulancy, to even juniors and the post-novices. I know you are a big spectrum. What I am talking out to be somewhere or other appeal to each and every one of you. But there may be some difficulty in terms of some of you to follow my line of thought. Simple reason. We are only in the first or second year. And there are also people who are in the fifth or sixth year as a junior, so to say. As they are in the very, what you call a big spectrum, long spectrum, what I share may sometimes appeal or appeal not to you. At the same time, there may be certain things which you may catch, you may not catch. But don't worry. And I have now worked out a dynamics. I will go on for 50 minutes or so, not even 1 hour, 7 highlights within 50 minutes. Once the 50 minutes are over, and there will be solid time, 15 or 20 minutes, 15 plus minutes available for any question, any clarification. And in case you could not follow my line of thought, raise the question, raise the question, raise the question. I'll be at your service and then give you explanations. One more, I don't want to repeat, by and large, what your directors of aspirancy or postulancy, or your directors or directresses of novitiate or juniorate, I don't want to repeat what they would have told you. But I have identified and I have enlisted 7 highlights. I immediately go into number 1. Number 1 is the, what we call it, the highlight number 1. This very interesting one. And it was nothing but the last sentence, the last verse of yesterday's second reading, Sunday reading. The 25th ordinary Sunday, yesterday reading. All of you would have listened to that reading. Letter of St. Paul to Philippians, chapter 1, verse number 27. Letter of St. Paul to Philippians, chapter 1, verse 27. St. Paul says, only one thing we should never ever forget. There is one thing we should never ever miss in our lives. And then he puts this one, nothing but to go by and stand by and live for gospel of Jesus. I tell you, we may be belonging to various congregations. We may be following various charisms. And we may be going by various constitutions. Our rules and regulations may be varying. And we are coming from various English-speaking countries for this international Formis program. But as St. Paul puts only one thing, there we are all one together. And we have to enjoy and we have to really celebrate that oneness. Only one thing in our life, which we should not forget. There's only one thing in our life. We should never ever miss, stand by, live for the gospel mission of Christ Jesus. And that is there. And today's gospel text, Matthew's Gospel, chapter 9. And there I'm going to throw the spotlight on the verse number 9. Today being the feast of St. Matthew, the sentence, the verse is very, very important and significant. Only one verse. St. Matthew himself writes, Gospel of Matthew, about Matthew, he writes this way. Verse number 9, chapter number 9. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. And Jesus said to him, follow me. And he got up and he followed Jesus. It's only one sentence. I am now inviting you at the very outset for my highlight number 1 to have a kind of a dream exercise. Just put yourself in the context, in the time and space of Matthew 2000 years ago. We are living in the year 2020. This happened solid about 2000 years ago. But we can fly back. And at that time, if we really go by the mind of Matthew, when he saw Jesus, follow me, certainly Matthew would have immediately gone through certain discernment. Possibilities were galore at the time, Matthew, to get up and go, which he did. But prior to that one, he would have thought, a passerby, Jesus just passing by, and he's calling me. That does not mean I need to go immediately. I will think about it. Put it along with the topic of today. I don't need to obey him immediately. I will obey eventually. Or another one. He says, you follow him. Follow means his gospel and his values. That means I will keep going with my profession of tax collecting, but I will do it justly, very truthfully, very loyally, and very fraternally, and very sincere, with a touch of sensitivity. I will collect the tax. I will prove my mettle and thereby live up to the call that Jesus has given me. Follow him. All these, if not more options, would have occurred before Matthew. But on the spot, he made a decision. On the spot, he went through a discernment. On the spot, he took a direction. And it says he got up immediately and followed Jesus. And we have to really learn from Matthew. Why? You and I, in one way or other, followed Matthew in following Jesus. And we also received the call. And we did not see Jesus passing by as Matthew could see 2000 years ago. But something or other really came across to us as a source of inspiration, as a highlight of vocation, as a kind of a substance of our dedication. And when by certain or some reason came across our mind, we said, we'll follow Jesus. I'll live up to the reason for which I live, I die, come what may, come what may, come what may. And this is the first highlight. I can go on, but I like to end here repeating what I said, namely various congregations, various constitutions, and various founders and foundresses, or various charisms, and various formation programs, even within the same congregation, even within the same province, we may be at the various stages of formation. But one thing, one and the only thing for which we have come to be is nothing but to stand by the gospel values of Jesus. Stand by the gospel mission. Stand by the truth of God, justice of God, freedom God has given to us, and the love of God and the love of neighbor, especially and the underloved and the unloved, the least and the lost. And that should be our focus. And we need to obey that, number one. I repeat, we need to obey that. Obey the gospel. Obey gospel values. Obey Jesus' path. Obey the call that we have received from God of vocation. Obey. Obey God. Obey God. Good. I can now move on to the second one. Second highlight is nothing but this one. Religious life is a call to be prophetic, a call to be radical. You know, today's theme, the focus is given the prophetic obedience, a bit different from blind obedience. You have many a time in the years of formation, we have been given that particular orientation, saying that we need to obey whatever is being asked of us. I'm not denying that one, but that's only a formation, kind of a foundation. That's a starting point. But comes the next one, higher level, as adult persons, as a matured persons, and we need to have not only so-called blind obedience, not only so-called saying yes, anything and everything, not only so-called fiat, as Mary of Nazareth said it in the Gospel according to Luke chapter 1, verses 26 to 38. But you should know, I should know, even that little girl, Mary of Nazareth, then Archangel Gabriel announced to her, namely she will be conceived of a son, and he will be called Emmanuel. And Mary did not accept it immediately. That's a prophetic obedience. And that means it's not a blind obedience. Though the particular Archangel Gabriel appeared on behalf of God, the Father, the Mother. Though Archangel Gabriel came to announce the words of God. And the Archangel Gabriel was only a messenger. But even to the messenger, Mary asked a simple question, and straight question, and a very solid question. How can that be? And Archangel Gabriel giving some explanation, you know it. And you will find it in the first chapter of Luke's Gospel. But after the explanation was quite satisfactory, and when the explanation was accepted, Mary then said, I am your handmaid, I accept. Fiat. That's a radicalism. That's a radicalism. That's a propheticism. And you and I are taught in our formation years that radicalism, or much more the propheticism, is a non-negotiable element of our consecrated life. Propheticism is an indispensable element and the feature of religious life. And propheticism, unavoidable feature of our consecrated life and religious life. What is propheticism? And propheticism means there are many, what we call many explanations going by what we call it by the Old Testament, the books of the prophets. But when I studied my theology, I still remember my professor gave 8 definitions to be a prophet. I'm not going to repeat every one of them. But one among them is the first one that I liked very much. I like to share with you because that colored my life. That governs my life. And what is that one? Prophet is someone who even left alone will stand for truth. Prophet is someone even left alone as a solitary reaper, left alone, he will still stand for justice. Truth, justice are quite the same biblically. So truth is justice. Justice is truth. And that's high point. And they are ready to go against the currents of the day. They are prophets. They are ready to be a sign of contradiction. They are prophets. And they may go against the flow, as I say, idiomatically. And they are prophets. Even other 99 say something else. When others, 99 say black, and this person knows in the court of conscience, it is white. And they will stand by it, though left alone, for truth, for justice. That is he or she is a prophet. I remember this particular definition. I like to share with you, and especially when we focus on obedience, should have the touch of propheticism, not simply saying yes, yes, not simply saying no, no. Why? With that, the second point is going to be over. Jesus himself says, Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5, verse number 37. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5, verse number 37. Jesus says, say yes when you have to say yes. Say no when you have to say no. In the blind obedience, though there are a number of descriptions, explanations in terms of the blind obedience, but by and large they come under this one. Namely, blind obedience means say yes all the time. What I'm going to tell you, take it with a pinch of salt. We don't need years of formation only to say yes, yes all the time. But the years of formation should give us that particular caliber, that character, and the quality, and the grace to discern and to say yes when we have to say yes, and say no when you have to say no. And that is the prophetic way of life, and that is prophetic obedience. Yes when you have to say yes. Say no when you have to say no. It's not my words. Jesus' words. In another context, Jesus also says this one. Let me quote that one as I complete this highlight number 2. Jesus says, you can even disobey Son of God. You can even disobey Son of God, said by the very Son of God, said by the very person called Jesus Christ. And he himself says, you can even disobey Son of God. Forgiveness is possible. But if you disobey the Spirit, forgiveness is not possible. The Spirit is in the inner voice. The Spirit is in the conscience. When in the court of conscience we have to say yes, we say yes. Because there's a voice of the Spirit of God. Prophetic obedience to God's will, to God's gospel, and God's vision, and God's mission. God's mission. Good. With this, I'm going to what I call highlight number 3. Here I have to talk a little about the history of consecrated life. Possibly you know, I'm not going to elaborate, but I cannot proceed further without giving this particular basic details. What is that one? The consecrated life, what we call generally religious life, was not present from the beginning of the history of the church. It came only towards the end of the 4th century. 4th century. When the church was at that time, after the Council of Chalcedon, after the conversion of Constantine, after the declaration of Christianity as a state religion of the Roman Empire, when this all happened in the 4th century, and there were lots of compromises made by the church, made by the Christianity. Till that time, they stood by truth, come what may. They had the propheticism. But after 300 years, there was certain certain relaxing. And said was certain leniency got in. Some complacency got in. And accordingly, they went for compromises with the powerful, compromises with the rich, compromises with the money and the property. And because of which, the church was started with what we call corruption. At that time, some convinced people, courageous people, conscious people, they came up, raised the voice for the gospel truth, and they demanded justice. Even when the official church was not ready for. But this particular prophetic group came up. And I'm not very sure whether your formators told you this particular one. At that time, they were not known as religions. They were not known as the vowed or consecrated. Do you know how they are known? They are Protestants within the church. Protestants within the church. They protested against the church for good. When the church was going for compromises, they said spade a spade. They called spade a spade. They demanded permission of the church. And they were prophets, as prophets Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and others of the Old Testament went against Judaism at the time. And they are prophets of the Old Testament. And now come to this detail, namely the 4th century when the consecrated life came up, and they were first ID card for them was the Protestants within the Catholic, within the church. When the church was going for compromise, otherwise they went along with the stream. They went along with the church. They went fall in line with the church. When the church was found going for certain compromises, giving up justice and suppressing freedom, and not extending love to the underloved and the least and the last. This group came up. That is called the emergence of religious life. But till the 7th century, interesting information, till the 7th century, they were not taking any vows. They just went by the 3 values of the gospel. Justice, number 1. Freedom, number 2. love for the least and the poorest, number 3, justice, freedom, and love. They stood by the values of the gospel. You remember that I started this session quoting St. Paul, letter to the Philippines, chapter 1, verse 27a, namely, one thing they should not forget, that is gospel of Jesus. And the religious emerged that way. 4th century they emerged. 5th, 6th, they did not take any vows. Today, unfortunately, I say unfortunately, that many a time we think the religious are nothing but vowed people. But till the 7th century, they did not take vows. They did not go by vows, but they went by the values of the gospel: justice, freedom, and love. But 7th century, I don't want to elaborate. You can ask your formators, your novice ministers or directors, or director, juniorate, or postulancy, whatnot. They may be able to tell you. At the end of this session, you can also ask. I'm ready to give. But I want to tell you, 7th century, because of a particular context, the first vow that so-called religious, the so-called Protestants within the church and prophets within the church, they started taking the first vow, and that vow is none other than obedience. They were influenced at the time by the person who wrote a rule just the previous century, that is Saint Benedict. And the rule of Benedict asked for the promise of vow of obedience. It's a promise of obedience. Now the religious said, we will take a vow. And now comes the next one, and that is my 4th point. I'm moving, and so that in course of time I may have to give some explanation about other points. Now moving to 4th point. Kindly travel with me. I'm making my things rather clear to you, and certainly you will be following my line of thought. I have given 3, now I'm moving to the 4th one. 4th highlight. When they started taking the vow of obedience in the 7th century, look at the detail. They had 4 manifestations or the references of obedience. All the 4 in order. There's a prioritization. Prioritization. And that means obedience to, first one, truth. Obedience to justice. As I said earlier, obedience to values of the gospel, freedom, love. That's obedience. So they said anything that goes against the gospel, they will disobey. As Jesus said, we will say no. When there is injustice, when there is untruth, when there is oppression, suppression of freedom, even within the church. It is there, they are known as Protestants within the church. Don't mix up with the other Protestants who are outside the church, like Martin Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, or Henry VIII of the 16th century. Now we are in the 7th century. That happened in the 16th century. That Protestants went out of the church. This 7th century, namely when the so-called religious, as we call ourselves religious today, and when they started taking the vow of obedience, the first is first. The first is first. Obedience to gospel values, truth or justice. Obedience to freedom of every individual. And third one, in that one, obedience to, what we call it, obedience to gospel values, justice, or truth, freedom, and love. And especially for the least. All put together, one. Obedience to gospel values. Second one, second one is, namely, obedience to conscience. That means whether that is true or not, whether that is justice or just or not. And you may and I may have to really discern in the court of one's own conscience. It is there Jesus says, listen to your spirit. Don't disobey the spirit. That means don't disobey your own conscience. In order to say yes outside, don't suppress your conscience. Suppress your conscience. And that way, obedience at the prioritized list. First one is to the gospel values. The second is obedience to one's own conscience, where the person listens to the voice of the Spirit and the voice of God, the inner voice, and the conscience well informed, well formed, and well transformed conscience. That's the second one. So this is the obedience to gospel values. I'm repeating. Second, obedience to one's own conscience that is well informed. Not any conscience, but well informed. Not any conscience, well formed. It is there, my dear friends, that you are going through the years of formation, and the formation, basically formation of one's own conscience, so that you know, going with the gospel values, when you have to say yes, obedience. When you have to say no, say no. That's also obedience. It's not disobedience, because you're obeying the gospel. Obeying the gospel. Well informed, well formed, well transformed conscience. Good. That takes me in the same line, the third one. And what is that one? Namely, at that then it becomes obedience to others, community, congregation, and leaders and superiors. There's a prioritization. The first is first. Gospel values. Obey that one first. The second one, obey your clear and clean conscience. I say it again, not any conscience. Looking at black, you cannot say that is white. It cannot, and you should not. Or looking at white, you cannot say that is black. And you cannot change the reality and say my conscience says that is humbug. That is not acceptable. That is nonsense. Doesn't make any sense. That is nonsense. But you have to speak the sense. And your conscience should have that particular sense. And the third one, others. There the community comes, the congregation comes, and then in the process, our leaders, superiors come. This is the way. I repeat, this is the way 7th century onward, the so-called consecrated religious started taking their vows. What I'm going to say, in case you have got any doubts, you can ask me at the end of the session. What is that one? Unfortunate, I repeat, unfortunate, it has become ulta, quite the opposite, quite the contrary. Today we say we have to obey superiors. Nothing wrong when they also speak truth. Always like Mary that asked the question, how can that be? And today we say we have to say yes to community. But only when they speak, when the community congregation speaks truth. In case it is not truth, Jesus followed another strategy. When Pilate asked, chapter number 19, John's Gospel, because Jesus is our role model and he is an example par excellence. And Jesus says, I have come to bear witness to truth. He was disobeying Pilate. Even when Pilate asked, I have every right to release you, dear. And he wanted to release free Jesus. But Jesus says, you don't need to free me for untruth. But I am ready to go through anything for truth. I tell you, my dear young friends, I know you are only aspirants and postulants. I know you are only pre-novices, novices. I know you are only post-novices, if not juniors. I know that you are only minor seminaries or possibly major seminarians. But I know you are in the young age of your years of formation. But still, nothing like getting it, the prophetic obedience to God's will, exactly, very clearly, very convincingly, very challengingly. and very courageously. Look at my next word, very committedly. So when you and I take the vow of obedience, we commit ourselves to God's will, God's mission, and the gospel of Jesus. And the obedience corresponds to justice. And when my conscience is clear, stand by it. Prophetism. At the time, I may have to say no to others. It is what Jesus says. You can even say no to me. Jesus says. You can even disobey Son of God. You can disobey even Son of God, said by the very Son of God. Forgiveness is possible. But if you disobey the Spirit within you, who talks to you, informs you, enlightens you, enthuses you, empowers you, don't disobey the Spirit. That means you are disobeying yourself. That is what I said, classically known as blind obedience. I repeat, there may be many definitions for the blind obedience, but better we avoid that word. Or when you refer to the word, eat it and say, I am prophetically obedient. And Pope Francis underlines and highlights this point quite frequently. And he has said it, no propheticism, then no religious life. No propheticism, there is no religious life. When we say religious life, prophetism is non-negotiable, unavoidable, indispensable. No excuse, no escape from propheticism so long you and I are religious, the consecrated, when we take the vow of obedience. Saying yes when there is truth. Saying no when the truth is absent. So to Pilate, Jesus said, I have come to bear witness to truth. I was born for it. I lived for it. See the next sentence. All those who follow me, Matthew, follow me. That is Matthew's Gospel chapter 9. This is John's Gospel chapter 19. As per your homework, you can even take these chapters. Chapter 9, follow me. Chapter that is Matthew's Gospel, Matthew. You and I, as I said earlier, we are following Jesus. But John's Gospel chapter 19, Jesus says, all those who have accepted me and those who are following me, they are walking in truth. The very fact that we get baptized in the name of Christ Jesus, the very fact that we got confirmed in this mission, that means we have committed ourselves to follow Jesus, come what may, in terms of standing for truth, struggling for truth, and then suffering for truth, and even sacrificing for truth. All the 4 S's. Standing for truth, struggling for truth. I got certain examples, but it might take some time. Therefore, I control myself. But during the clarification, do please ask. I'm ready to give some examples. And so that all the 7 highlights I can finish, and there will be some time, as I said earlier, and we will have clarification till 7:25. Then the concluding verse and the instructions, vote of thanks, and then by 7:30 we should close with a short prayer, so that we go by prophetic obedience. Obedience. Now it takes me to the next point. That is number 5. Number 5. This is a basic definition of obedience. Purposely, I didn't want to say it at the outset. Now, before closing, I like to say it. And 5th highlight. That is obedience. The root word is nothing but listening. Oh, other way, listening. We need to listen and see the explanation. If you and I are committed to be prophetic persons for God's mission, Even though baptism, confirmation may give us, but all the more profession, ordination, grant us that particular task in a very singular way, in a very significant way, then we have to understand obedience comes as listening, means listening. Now look at the details. It will be something very interesting, at the same time inspiring, if not inviting explanation. Number one, listen to oneself. What's the use of listening to all others? Then you are not ready to listen to yourself. Then I am not ready to listen to myself. But when I say I listen to myself, it is not me, Jerry. It is not you, Anna, Mary, or John, or James. But it is listening to God who is talking to me from within. God is outside, but much more God is inside. What's the use of putting God inside and then going back God outside and searching and then finding God outside? Who said that one? Jesus. What was his sentence? Kingdom is within you. That is, God is within you. John's Gospel chapter 4, and when Jesus was conversing with the Samaritan woman by the side of Jacob's well, he would even say, you don't need to go to Jerusalem as Jews. He himself was a Jew. He said, you don't need to go to Jerusalem as Jews would go to meet God. That is called outside. And he was talking to the Samaritan woman. He refers to say, you don't need to go to the top of the mountain as a Samaritan would go to meet God. But he says, Madam, time is coming. And then he says, no, it has already come. Do you know what's the next sentence? You know it. You find God in truth. Find God in spirit. And the spirit comes within me. I have to listen to myself. Listen to my inner voice. I have to listen to the Spirit of God speaking to me and knocking my heart. And then making my mind and molding my intellect and shaping my life. It's easy to find God in the tabernacle. I have no purpose whatsoever to deny this particular fact. I'm a priest. I'm a Jesuit. I'm also converted, but I should know as you should know. Namely, easy to find God in the tabernacle. Easy to find God in the church, temple, mosque, whatnot. It's what Jesus says. You don't need to go. Find God in truth. Stand by truth. God is with you. And worship God in spirit. You are the temple of God. You are the living temple, living tabernacle, and a living abode of God, a living space and place of God. Kingdom is within you. Here, very interesting information. Namely, you do diocesan priests. I don't know whether any seminarians here listening to me. They don't take the vow of obedience. They take the promise of obedience. That's called promise of obedience to the local ordinary, to the local bishop of their respective diocese. And that is called promise. But there's a difference. The promise of obedience given by the diocesan clergy to their respective bishop stands with that one. Nothing more, nothing less. For example, a priest is being transferred by the bishop to another place. The priest may have some reasons not to go. Then he should explain. With all the representation, with all the information, bishop still says, I listen to you. But still you kindly listen to me because you have taken the promise of obedience. Promise of obedience to me. Therefore, for greater good, for greater vision, and for greater fruitfulness on your part, I'm transferring you. The priest would abide because he has given the promise. Though I repeat, He can still stand by his conscience and give reasons and can propose. But if the bishop accepts, well and good. But in case the bishop has got other reasons to give, and thereby to impresses upon the priest clergy, saying that I accept all your reasons, but I got greater reasons and deeper purposes and nobler causes and concerns. So you can switch over to another place and then spend about 5 or 7, whatever the years, and then let me know what more can be done. He has taken the since he has taken the promise of obedience, he has to listen to the bishop eventually. But he cannot go to higher ups. For example, he cannot bypass the bishop or disobey the bishop, go to the archbishop, because he has taken the promise to his own bishop, local ordinary. Archbishop will not come in, or archbishop cardinals will not come in, even Rome will not come in. Nobody can come in, so to say. But whereas consecrated, religious, you and I take the form of obedience. We need to, when I said we are to listening to God inside, you can go to the local superior. In case local superior is not ready, you can go to the provincial superior. That is Rome. I got every right to appeal to a higher authority. It's a local court, local superior. He can go to high court, and that is called high court, and that is a provincial superior. And in case even the provincial is not ready, and not ready to listen to you, and what you say really stands, you are standing by truth, and you have got every reason to really struggle for, suffer for, and you want to really stand by what your inner voice says, then you can even go to Superior General and the Supreme Court, so to say, within one's own congregation. As novices and juniors, you should be well informed even in this particular respect. Others may, formators may say, may not say, but you should know. There's a difference between promise of obedience given by the diocesan clergy, and this is vow of obedience given to the institute, given to the constitution, and that way given to the conscience, and thereby live up to your call. Good, I can go on, but let me now move to the next one, that is highlight number 6. Highlight number 6. I have only 7. I'm already coming to 6th one, and with the 7th one I will complete and be ready to answer any question, any clarification. Because last week I said formation is a question time. Therefore, you should have ample time to raise your questions, ask for clarifications, and I need to give my explanations. In case I do not have explanations, I will come with some homework and answer your question even tomorrow, day after, since I'm going to travel with you today, tomorrow, and day after. Good. The 6th one is a special one. You would have not expected this one to be said today. But when I got sat down to prepare, when I pondered over to prepare, and then thoughts like this also came. Okay, obedience, obedience. I said from the 7th century, obedience, obedience. But many a time we are bombarded with blind obedience. And we are asked to say, yes, yes, yes. Now Jerry says, going to Jesus' word. It's not Jerry's Concord story. And it's not a cock and bull story from Jerry. Jerry based his thoughts on the words of Jesus. And accordingly, going by the gospel mission of Jesus. If that's the case, namely we need to call it prophetic obedience. Bit different, if not more different than blind obedience. It's not only saying yes, but saying even no obedience. Obey the Spirit, say no. Obey the truth, say no. But if there is truth, say yes. If there is no truth, say no. I said it, but I'm emphasizing that one so that at the end of this session, you have something to consider about. And in case you have got any doubts, clarifications, standing need of, I'm at your service. Good. The 6th one, I said, okay, obedience is a word, classical word. That is last about 13 centuries. That is 1,300 years. We are using this word obedience, obedience, obedience. We may finish today's program on obedience. Tomorrow we are going to see chastity, following day, poverty. So today may be over by 7:30 or so. But we should not simply get back to square number one. Think the old definition of obedience. Therefore, I did some homework this morning when I got myself prepared for this session. Can we use some other word to understand obedience and interpret obedience and describe and define and describe obedience in the modern version, modern language, and challenging version? We may not be able to change the formula of our vows. We may not be able to omit obedience there. But from today onward, when we say the word obedience, we can understand the back of our head a new version. I thought of 3 or 4, but you can even think more, and you can share among yourselves. Something special you can even share among us assembly. As I see numbers are going up, even went up to 441, and now there are 435. But you know, there is a good number of you who are participating, so the discussions among yourself can take place in your after the session. And tomorrow when you come, you can even give me any other version than what I'm going to say. So I'm now proposing as a modern version, instead of using the word, the classical and the traditional word obedience, can we use the word authenticity? Authenticity. A-U-T-H-E-C-I-T-Y. Authenticity. I have to be authentic. And that means I stand by my conscience, authentic to God within me. Another word, simple word, but it has got a lot of substance. Sincerity. Sincerity. Though we use this word quite frequently, if we ponder over, use a challenge behind that particular term, concept. Sincerity. Honesty. Honesty. You need to be honest to yourself and sincere to yourself, because God's kingdom is within you. Or truthfulness. I take the vow of truthfulness. As I said, we may not be able to change the term obedience, but we use a word that can really trigger off the propheticism that has to be within us, and which we need to develop and grow in the grace of propheticism. That is truthfulness. You remember what I said? The professor, biblical scholar by name Padima, an Australian American Jesuit, who taught me when I did my studies. That is about 35, 40 years ago. And some of you would have not born at that time. But now coming to that detail, I still remember when he hit the point. Namely, the prophet's first definition, the best definition is who stand for truth. Truthfulness. They obey God. Good. Truthfulness. Authenticity. Sincerity. Honesty. Truthfulness. Next one, transparency. I'm transparent. There is no hidden agenda. So when I have to say yes, I say yes. No hidden agenda. When I have to say no, I say no, as Jesus said. Verse number 37, chapter number 5, Gospel according to Matthew. No hidden agenda. Jesus did it. Jesus did it. And though he belonged to Judaism, though he said, I have come to follow the law, not even an iota will go without being fulfilled. But he went to the spirit of the matter, and at times he said no to the letter of the law, Sabbath law. Mark's Gospel chapter 2, Mark's Gospel chapter 3, John's Gospel chapter 8. He went against the letter of the law. When a woman caught in adultery should be stoned to death. But he went by the spirit of the law and liberated, freed the person, even though the woman was caught in adultery. And he healed the sick, even on the Sabbath day, and performed miracles on the Sabbath day. And he said, it's not good to do. And thereby he went and proved his mettle. And that is called transparency, no hidden agenda. He's not seeking his own name and fame. He says in John's Gospel chapter 4, verse number 34, my meat My food is to do the will of God. And the will of God is I have to stand for justice, truth, freedom, love. To begin with the truth and or justice. My food is to do the will of God, to stand by the truth of God. Why? Truth is God. When I stand for truth, I stand for God. Why? Jesus says, I am the truth. And Jesus says, I come to bear witness to truth, who is God. Good, I can go on. Authenticity, sincerity, honesty, transparency, credibility, words can come. And whichever you make a choice or you search for a concept or a term which will challenge you to go by the prophetic obedience to God's will as today's focus invites us. The last one, the seventh highlight. The seventh highlight is nothing but this one. Today we are living in a modern world, post-Second World War, and we are living in a globalized world. But better one is, we are also living in democratized world. About 100 years ago, 60, 50, 70 years ago, including my country, India, and many countries in Africa, many countries in South Hemisphere, many countries in Asia, many countries in both in Central and South America, and many countries even in the northern part of America, anywhere for that matter. And there was no democracy. And there was a colonial rule. And power from outside came, sat over the local people, and then they demanded obedience. That is different obedience. But today we are living in a democratized world. They got liberated from the colonial powers. My country, for example, India, is a democratic country from 15th of August 1947. And my neighbor, that is Pakistan, just one day before, that is 14th of August 1947, they become democratic. Or the country that is close to my country, my state of Tamil Nadu, South India, that is the country of Sri Lanka, became independent on the 4th of February 1948. Just about another 6 months after Indian democracy, and they got the independence, Sri Lanka. You can think of your own. But now we're living in a democratic world. What does it mean? Even the obedience in our communities and congregations should be done in a dialogical way. So obedience, prophetic, but still dialogical obedience. That means listening. So even the superior higher-ups, they have to listen to the subjects, the members of the community, the province and the congregation. I know I'm talking to formations. I know I'm talking to you where you are postulants and aspirants and novices and children. Still, you get the notion exactly. And so that tomorrow you get formed such a way, tomorrow you will not dominate, but you become a servant leader. Listening to your members of the community. That will not come at a time. It should come now itself. Now itself, you may be in the novitiate and you may be asked to take care of, for example, manual work. And you cannot simply sit over other novices, your own co-novices, but you need to dialogue. So dialogical obedience, collaborative obedience. We do together. Not somebody is ordering, others have to say yes and do the job. And there is no military obedience. Instead, collaborative, participative obedience or participatory obedience. Democratic obedience. This has to be, this particular one, you can call it anyway, dialogical or collaborative or interactive or participative or participatory, all put together. Democratic obedience has to be recommended and promoted. Even those who are really come up in terms of formation to take the vow of obedience, they should know, I obeyed myself where God wants. At the same time, I need to also listen to others so that the decision and the directions and the dedications, all our deeds, everything will be done as per God's mission, God's will. Over. Thank you so much. I end where I began, namely when Matthew was called, follow me. It looked as a simple word, Now we begin to understand that following is not blindly, but following is prophetically and proactively and positively and powerfully and productively. One can go on with the words, but every word has got something to say. I end here.